The story of Jacob's fight is written in the Bible in the book of Genesis chapter 32. Let's take a look at it. Genesis chapter 32 verse 22 to 32. And he rose that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he altered upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, until this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. For a long while before day, Jacob was alone, and he had crossed the ford of Jabbok with his 2 wives and 11 children. He got them safely across the brook, along with all his possessions, but stayed behind by himself, and he spread his fears before God in prayer. He was afraid because he had received account on Esau's warlike presentation towards him. Someone in the likeness of a man wrestled with him. They wrestled until daybreak, and although the man injured Jacob's hip, Jacob didn't lose hope. He kept his ground and fought further. Jacob was injured, but he still didn't let the man go. He fought the man further and still didn't let him go when he begged Jacob. Rather, he asked him for a blessing, and until the man blessed him, he didn't let him go. When we pray sincerely, the Spirit helps our infirmities, and our earnest desires are then uttered, and this prayer is indeed wrestling with God. No matter how tired or discouraged we are, we shall win. We shall win with Him in prayer, and we shall overcome all situations or enemies that are against us. Nothing requires more strength and unrelenting power than wrestling. It's a sign of the true spirit of faith and prayer. Though Jacob's wrestle lasted for a while and was painful too, his faith did not shake, and nor did he silence his prayer. He set his mind on getting a blessing and would rather lose his bones than live without a blessing. The fervent prayer is the effectual fervent prayer. James chapter 5 verse 16 says, The heartfelt and persistent prayer of a righteous man, believer, can accomplish much when put into action and made effective by God. It is dynamic and can have tremendous power. Jacob's request was a fervent one. He didn't give up. The angel put a lasting sign of honor upon him by changing his name from Jacob, which signifies a supplanter, to Israel, which signifies God wrestler. And the angel gave him the name because he had struggled with God and with men and had prevailed. A prince with God, a name greater than the names of the great men of the earth, was given to Jacob. He was made a prince indeed. That was a prince with God. Those who are truly honorable are those who are mighty in prayer. The angel went further than changing his name and blessed Jacob. It declared the blessings of the confident promises on Jacob. Jacob will no longer be celebrated for just craft and art, but for true value. He shall have power with God, and he shall have power with men too. He shall prevail and gain Esau's favor. Jacob named the place where he had wrestled God. He called it Peniel, God's face, because he said, I saw God face to face, and lived to tell the story. The angel who wrestled with God was the second person in the sacred Trinity who became flesh, and who dwelling in human nature is called Emmanuel. Hosea chapter 12 verse 4-5. Jacob halted on his thigh. It might serve to keep him from being lifted with the abundance of the revelations. The sun rose on Jacob. It is sunrise with that soul which has had communion with God. Israel was a nation named after a man once called Jacob, whose story was told principally in Genesis chapter 25 to chapter 35. While Jacob was greedy and grasping and went to exile for it, he had another side. He had an eagerness to meet God and blessed by him, which culminated in his nighttime wrestle with God. It is an important indication that although Jacob went into exile, as would the nation of Israel, he came back with God's blessing on his future. So also the prophet Hosea in Hosea chapter 12 suggests that the nation Israel could receive the abundant blessing of God. Let's do a track back and try to understand how Jacob ended up wrestling God. Jacob was the second born of Isaac and Rebekah, and the grandson of Abraham, the father of many nations. Jacob had a twin brother, Esau, who was the firstborn of the two of them. Jacob's name means supplanter or heel grabber, which means one who would take what belongs to someone else. Jacob tricked his brother and stole his blessings, and this made Esau want to kill him, so he fled from home to his mother's homeland. On the way, he had a vision of angels and a ladder to heaven. Jacob reaches Haran, and he worked several years for Laban, his uncle and eventual father-in-law. Jacob reaches Haran, and his uncle Laban is just like him, selfish and tricky. Jacob sought to marry Rachel, whom he was in love with, but Laban tricked him into marrying his older sister Leah. Jacob persevered and is eventually able to marry Rachel. Jacob had to work many years for Laban. By God's protection, because Jacob was wise, Jacob was able to take much of Laban's earth for himself. After Jacob had made something successful of himself, God leads him to return to his father's land. The challenge that he would have to face Esau. As he approached home, Jacob sent forth his servants to Esau, and they would return to tell him that Esau is coming towards them with 400 men. Jacob was afraid. He sent his people and possessions across, but stays behind to pray to God. It is at this point he meets a man who he wrestles with through the night.